All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you. Thank you for being here. My name is Trey Czar. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Impact Florida. And on behalf of our president, Mandy Clark, the Lastinger Center for Learning and Chiefs for Change, I'm excited to welcome you to our webinar today, Florida Leaders Reflect, How System Leaders Responded to the Coronavirus. Before we get started, with coronaviruses again rising as we enter the winter, I wanted to take a moment to remember those we've lost and those who continue to battle the virus, as well as honor the hard work and tremendous sacrifices of our healthcare workers and first responders, including the millions of teachers nationwide who've pivoted to support students in new ways during this challenging time.
Hey, Renee, I don't think that thing ought to be posted.
We have an amazing panel of some of those Florida education leaders with us today who will speak about their experiences this past spring, when the emerging COVID-19 pandemic forced states across the country to abruptly shift students into distance learning. Moderating today's panel will be Mike Magee, the CEO of our partner, Chiefs for Change, a nonprofit bipartisan network of diverse state and district education chiefs. Previously, he co-founded and was CEO of the Rhode Island Mayoral Academies, or REMA. Before starting REMA, for a dozen years, Mike taught American literature and philosophy at Haverford College, Wheaton College, and the Rhode Island School of Design. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Trey. And we're so happy to have the partnership of the Lastinger Center and Impact Florida as we have this discussion today. Just to reinforce what you said, I'm the CEO of Chiefs for Change. We're a community of about 36 leaders who serve over 7 million students across the country. It's a bipartisan network of diverse leaders in every possible regional context across the country, with a group of leaders aligned around a common set of beliefs and committed to making a difference so that every student in America is prepared for today's world and tomorrow's. Florida is quite important to us. As you know, there are about 3 million public school students in Florida. About a quarter of them are served by leaders within our community of leaders at Chiefs for Change. We have a number of those leaders today, and I'm really excited today to talk to them about how they've approached pandemic response and serving all of their students well in this difficult time. So I'd like to introduce everyone first, and then I'm excited to get going with our conversation. Among the Chiefs for Change members that we have on the panel today and alumni of our Future Chiefs Leadership Development Fellowship are Superintendent Barbara Jenkins from Orange County Public Schools, Chiefs for Change member and Future Chief alumnus Donald Fennoy, the Superintendent of Palm Beach County School District, the Senior Chancellor in Florida, Eric Hall at the Department of Education, and the Chief Academic Officer for Miami-Dade County Public Schools, Marie Izquierdo. We also have Phil Poekert, the Director of the University of Florida's Lastinger Center for Learning, on the panel today. And Phil, I'm going to ask you to start by providing us with an overview of what research can teach us about Florida's district response during this difficult time.
Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to be with this distinguished panel and to share some of the findings that the Lastinger Center was able to pull together as part of our own response to the COVID-19 crisis that has swept across our state and globe. And so this was an effort that we kicked off back in May of this year when we were thinking about how we could lend a hand to communities across the state of Florida. And so this was really an effort to understand the responses and approaches that were taken both by public schools and private schools, K-12 and early learning programs, to really understand what challenges were faced, what successes were had, and what lessons could be learned. So we sought out to find some common themes in terms of those challenges and what responses were taken. We wanted to highlight innovations that occurred because we saw lots of creativity. I think everyone, you'll see lots of examples being spoken to throughout the panel by my colleagues. at schools and early learning programs. And then we wanted to be able to offer these up through a searchable map that we have now put together so that folks can identify best practices and learn from them moving forward. Our timeline looked like this. In May, we began the planning around this and developed the research tools that were used to collect the data that's represented here. By the end of May and through June, we were already conducting interviews, focus groups. We were launching a survey. Over the summer in June and July, we were compiling and analyzing that data. And because we wanted to get the information out quickly, we moved to publishing briefs, research briefs, that captured some of the emerging findings that were coming out of the data set that we pulled together. And here we are in November, where we have put together a full report that we are sharing with the public of those lessons learned. These come from the stories of students, of parents, of teachers, early childhood and K-12 educators and administrators, and they are talking about their experiences of COVID-19 and how it impacted their work in education. And it was made possible through the funding of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and conducted in partnership with our dissemination partner, Impact Florida. We broke the state up into 10 designated media areas. These are the same 10 designated media areas that local news stations and advertising companies did, because we used media reports from local newspapers and local TV stations as an important data source, because they were gathering those stories as they came up in real time. And then we conducted over 50 interviews in both individual interviews and focus groups with about 66 participants, including those participants that I mentioned earlier. And we did so in such a way to maximize variation across those regions. We focused on public, private, charter, and virtual schools, so had representation within the data set across all of those different areas. And the surveys that we received, as you see, over 5,600 survey responses, mainly from parents and caregivers. And there was an incredibly rich data set, because not only did they respond in terms of our quantitative data, many of them used that opportunity to give us very rich descriptions of what their experiences were. In addition, we had hundreds of early learning and K-12 teachers respond. As I said, we quickly moved to publishing briefs off of it, and 5 key themes emerged in those briefs. The first, which we published very early in August as we were moving towards the resumption of schooling, was focused around the importance of taking a trauma-informed approach to resuming schools, just recognizing that everyone, quite literally across the globe, had experienced some trauma as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity and care taken as we greeted children and educators back into the buildings or back onto online learning experiences about how to attend to the emotional needs that they may exhibit and very early on. In addition, we captured some of the best practices that we saw, what districts did in preparing educators and families for distance learning. Those that engaged in initial preparation were really, really successful in being able to make that transition more smoothly. We also saw incredible communication innovation around that in terms of strategies to engage teachers, students, and families to stay in touch, especially as these situation was constantly evolving and emerging. In order for those communication strategies to be effective, though, we also pointed out what many saw as the most significant challenge to promoting distance learning in the midst of the pandemic, which was access to technology and broadband connectivity, which was a necessary piece to engaging in those distance learning opportunities in many communities. And then because the early childhood experience was markedly different, we published a brief specifically on that, looking at early childhood care as a cornerstone both to our education system, but also to getting our economy functioning once again. We're now at the point where we're publishing this final report, and I certainly encourage you to go to our website in order for you to be able to download it. It's here at this URL, which we're going to put into the chat. This is the title. We feel a great responsibility around capturing and sharing the stories from the many respondents that we spoke to. And we're sharing their challenges, successes, and lessons learned. We hope that these can take this moving forward. And you're going to hear a number of incredible stories from our panelists here today, and I'm going to share with you a few more. We've captured many of them in this searchable map where you can go and look by the various themes that we've identified within the report. You can also search by location in order to see what came up on that map, and so I encourage you to be able to poke around. But just to give you a sense of what we found, I wanted to be able to share with you some of the voices of respondents that we had across those themes. The 6 themes that we captured in the report begin with this: the persistent challenge of educational equity and how it manifested so starkly within the midst of the pandemic. I think all of us saw issues of educational inequity really rise to the fore. And this voice, and I am going to read these to you just so you can hear them in the way that we heard them within our interviews. A principal from Clay County told us, "The students I serve are vulnerable. We have a low socioeconomic status population. I fight for them to have equity of resources every day in a normal brick and mortar setting. So my concern was, how do I have that same fight? How do I provide the same resources when they're not here?" Just to give you an illustration of some of the issues that folks were struggling with in order to identify, and this is just one example of the many challenges that we saw as educators fought to address these issues of equity. A second theme that came out of our work was just the importance of preparing teachers to be able to execute distance learning. We understand the investment in teachers is one of the most significant investments we can make in education. And just to give you a sense of what teachers were facing, this teacher in Duval County told us, "It stressed me out because it was like I was only given a 3-day period to figure all of this stuff out and get my class ready and together, and then assign lessons for my kids." I think you'll hear from each of the panelists today how almost overnight, they had to transition to a completely new format for being able to offer education to Florida students. This is one illustration that we captured within our data set. A third theme was the importance of systematizing communication among educators, families, and students. I'd have to say that this is a real highlight from our findings. It's just the new and innovative communication strategies that were employed via social media, via technology. And this is a great example that came from Dr. Jennifer Brown, who assented to the use of her name in the report, saying, "We've done so much more surveying and asking our families for input. They've really become co-creators with us, which has been my vision for a long time. We really need our families to feel like they are co-creators in their children's education." I think we can all resonate with that in this willingness or desire to really have parents as co-creators within their children's education. Some of the examples of the communication that happened during the pandemic gave us insights into how we might be able to continue that into the future. In order for that to continue, as I alluded to earlier, we're going to really have to take a look at the technological infrastructure that we have in place in Florida and really across our country in order to support the kind of communication. A teacher in Bay County in the Panhandle told us, we could definitely see some demographically around our city that the number of students who were logging into the platforms that were provided were very sporadic in certain areas. So our more low income areas, we might have 30% buy-in, but we might have 70% in our more affluent areas. It was certainly a pattern that we had to grapple with. And I think we all saw this in terms of access, opportunity, something that we really need to think through so we can advocate for investment at the highest level possible at state and federal levels in order to create that infrastructure to get high-speed broadband connectivity. It's not just an issue of providing education. It's an issue of getting access to government services, which moved online during the pandemic. It's an issue of moving our economy forward as more and more folks engage in economic activity via the internet. Our fifth was really around the COVID slide, and I think we've all heard about this in terms of assessment, acceleration, accountability. How did we handle that during the pandemic when we were all doing our best? A statewide education leader told us, if you're a struggling learner in the face-to-face environment and have not had any connection with the school or a teacher throughout distance learning in the summer, you have to be identified right away and brought into the school system and get that targeted instruction intervention. We really wanted to think through how we make sure we're giving students what they need, how we engage in assessment, how we hold teachers accountable within this system. We hope that there's lessons learned because there were certainly innovative ways in which we measured how students were learning, what they were learning, and what they needed to learn in order to get them to where they needed to be. And last but not least, again, just noting the difference in the experience among early childhood providers, which at the depths, there were still 40% of childcare programs across the state of Florida that were still open and operating. And as schools were resuming in the fall, early childhood programs, already 80% of them were open and operating in the state of Florida. Susan Block of the Early Learning Coalition of Southwest Florida told us, if we have high quality early learning programs and children are getting those appropriate experiences early on, school readiness becomes a whole lot more prolific in our cities and everything else follows. And so we just understand early learning, again, is that cornerstone that builds for the long-term success of students, but in the short term, it builds for the success of our economy, which we all know is essential to getting things back on track. So I appreciate the opportunity just to share some of these illustrations of the stories that our respondents shared with us. I intentionally selected stories that came from districts outside of those that you'll hear about from the panelists to highlight some voices throughout the state. And I look forward to hearing more from this distinguished group of colleagues talking about their response to the pandemic. And I'll turn it back to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Phil. Just as a reminder to folks in our audience, we are going to leave time for questions in about 20 minutes. And if anyone has questions for Phil about his work at Impact Florida, that's a great time to ask those. You can put them right in the Q&A box and we'll make sure, do our best to get to them. I want to start by thinking about what we heard from one of those teachers in Duval County, which is, I think, something that we've heard from many teachers across the state of Florida and across the country. Of course, to varying degrees, districts across Florida shifted to an online learning environment in the spring, and virtual learning continues today. I'm curious to hear from all of you what it has looked like to support your teachers and staff in that transition. How have you shifted to online learning? What kind of instructional supports are you providing now to make sure that that's effective for students? Barbara, can you tell us what this has looked like in Orange County and how you're currently supporting educators?
Sure, happy to share, and certainly pleased to be on the panel with such esteemed colleagues, and appreciate Phil and the Impact Florida report. In Orange County, we had a bit of an advantage, but it's hard to even call it that because nobody was prepared for what we had to go through last March when we had the actual shutting down of our schools. In Orange County, we had an initiative that has been going on for the last 6 years, providing digital learning to all of our students. And we were down to that last cohort group. It was the remaining 1/3 of our elementary schools that needed to receive their devices and whose teachers needed to go through the additional training to be prepared for using the platforms. So our high schoolers who started out the pilot, they had been doing lots of digital instruction for the last 5 years in some instances. Problem was twofold. One, not every teacher had to be engaged extensively on the digital platform because you still had children in class with you, but the resources were there and they could use them as they saw fit. All of a sudden, nobody had a choice. Everyone needed to go digital and be able to use those resources. So you had a divide, not just with our students and some of their ability to engage on a digital platform, but with our teachers. So training and development for some teachers, for example, who had years of experience, brilliant teachers that weren't always taking full advantage of some of the digital platform instruments and devices and tools that we had available, all of a sudden were forced to go full force into the digital platform. That was extremely challenging. So our teaching and learning department did lots of training, lots of support, lots of preparation, and providing tools for those teachers. I think the other thing that we were not counting on, we had pilots going with tools such as Swivel, where a teacher could actually engage with students in their classroom and students at home at the same time. That is a significant lift for any of our teachers. And those who have been going through the pilot with it were more exposed and prepared for it. Others were not. So we had to do significant training and development around that. Our advantage was that we, from a half-penny sales tax, had those devices available for the vast majority of our students. We did not have connectivity for every one of our students. So looking to philanthropic support and resources that could be purchased to give hotspots to our children got to be pretty significant here in Orange County to make sure every student had that connectivity. And I think, Mike, those are probably the two greatest areas: teacher preparation for the tremendous lift. Though you were exposed to it before, now all of a sudden it's your only modality for instructing students. That was significant, the training and preparation for our teachers and making sure all of our students had not just the devices, but the connectivity. And I will tell you, Orange County and the rest of the state, because of our commissioner and Chancellor Eric Hall, really had a push toward compassion and flexibility and trying to accommodate some of the fear, but there was no way around it. There was significant concerns and fear as we delved into that pandemic.
Thank you, Barbara. Donald, I know that in your work in this area, you've also tried to integrate an emphasis on the social and emotional well-being of students and teachers. What does it look like to try to integrate social and emotional supports and academic supports into your plan during this time?
Well, I mean, it has been a challenge, but let's be clear. I think when we first, March 13th, when we went, it became quickly, we realized that if we don't start tackling once we got past the graduation experience, which was challenging, that was the first time I realized that this was going to be divisive. So when you're, dealing with the science and you're trying to figure this out, and then when you realize just how hard that was, we realized when we go back to school in August, if we don't take care of our employees, have school, so it became this sort of two-pronged approach around dealing with the SEL. Now, we were very fortunate, similar to Barbara, the social emotional piece. So we had a lot of things in place. And so, when we thought about, creating this belonging, we went to distance learning, we were peering into a lot of our kids' homes for the first times. And our eyes got opened very big. And it became clear that, and then another piece of this was like the adults. We had employees who don't have so we really pulled out all of our resources and again, in this age of COVID, it just became critical to create this belonging atmosphere. So our referendum, we were able to have a mental health provider in every school in Palm Beach County. So we were doing a lot of home visits, tailoring and creating lessons that started to bring some of those core values to the table, and began sort of in the early stages of getting brick and mortar, just dealing with our own mental state, myself included. So if it wasn't for, and I'll be 100% honest, conversations with Dr. Hall and Dr. Jenkins, she made me, Donald, are you okay? And she's like, you got babies, you got a family. So, that's the, and again, we don't talk a lot about that. Curriculum, a lot of morning exercises, a lot of affirmations. And again, we had a little phrase where you got to look into people's eyes. People, but again, things are happening. People are losing family members. I'm not, I wasn't excluded from that harsh reality. It's pull all those resources down, create professional development opportunities, and monitor it, to be honest. We started monitoring and making sure that as kids flow, we
Donald, we're having a little trouble hearing you, I think.
I'll log off and log back in and see if I can get it to work.
Okay, great. Thank you. Eric, you've had a view of the entire state during this time, and I know you've been working hard to help people make this transition to digital learning. What has that been like from the state's perspective? Oh, I think you might be on mute, Eric.
Sorry, got it now. Sorry about that. I'll start out by saying this, Mike. I feel like I'm on a Zoom meeting right now with my brothers and sisters. I mean, we have really kind of been navigating this work hand in hand. I would say that, Superintendent Jenkins mentioned this earlier. We tried to do this from a standpoint of how do we support with compassion and grace. We started out with a lot of communications. I go back to that call. I remember it vividly on March 13th. It was the Friday before many of our districts were getting ready to start their spring break, or some of them were getting ready to come back off of spring break. And we had to move pretty urgently and swiftly to transition, nearly 3 million students and thousands of teachers and districts and leaders and everybody else to, a distance learning model. And while, nothing happens perfectly when you move at that kind of speed, but I have to say, I mean, Florida, we're very blessed. I mean, our superintendents came together and they worked hand in hand with us and our team here at the department, I think, to try to figure out how do we create the conditions that are most successful. We're fortunate that we have, 6 of the largest districts in the nation right here in Florida. And those 6 districts, while having varying degrees of resources, here at the State Department, we also had to think about our rural communities throughout this process, where we do have oftentimes a greater degree of digital divide because of broadband access. We tried to look at how we reprioritize some of our own funding that we had available here at the department to get, over 30,000 devices out to some of our most needy students that we knew in districts where they had a lack of devices accessible for student use. We worked with our business community to expand access to broadband and internet. Oftentimes, providers offering it for 60 days for free for families that needed that. Even to the standpoint where we've had businesses step up, like T-Mobile, that is going to offer, over the next 5 years, 600,000 families in our state access to free internet, so that it's focused not only on this current challenge, but also on some of the homework gap that we're concerned about. And, when we went into this back on March 13th, we tried to do a couple strategic things. One was we amped up our communication. I think we kind of rolled up our sleeves hand in hand with our district leaders to say, okay, what do we need to do to work through these hard times? Because the hard conversations were going to come, ranging from how did we work with superintendents on flexibilities? How did we, not just flexibilities in policy, but flexibility in funding, all the way up to where when we got into the point of looking at our CARES Act funding, how did we use that with a high degree of intentionality on, getting funds that, the 90% out to the districts, but even the 10% set aside here for the state, how do we use that to reinvest back into the districts with efforts around achievement gaps, looking at, opportunities for summer programs to get some of our students back in that needed additional intervention and support, to, building out telehealth supports in some of our high need areas where the emotional supports and the other gaps that we're concerned about, those non-academic barriers. I think all the way around, it's been the healthy conversations that we've been having and trying to be focused on an intentional strategy that is not about just reacting to the circumstance, but saying, okay, how do we double down on this moment to say, let's focus on these achievement gaps that have been exacerbated during this time, getting 20 additional reading literacy directors around the state that are working with our district partners on early stage literacy interventions, working with Phil and his team on how do we get more of our teachers certified and prepared to teach evidence-based and science-based reading strategies. It's been, I think, again, a pretty comprehensive strategy. And I said it a minute ago, I feel like I'm on a call with my brothers and sisters because we have all in some way, shape or form been interacting in this strategy. And we've had, the difficult challenges of trying to figure out how do we navigate barriers that have popped up. And sometimes we got to figure out how to lean on each other and create conditions across the state that in the end are lifting all of us up to get past this and be prepared for what's ahead. And so it's just been a privilege and an honor to serve with the group that's on this call and the rest of the superintendents around the state that I think collectively when times get tough, I think you can tell the real character of people because they either come together or they pull apart. And I think here we pull together.
Well, and it's great, Eric, to see the state, playing an important role in making sure every child's home gets connected to the internet. Chiefs for Change just put out a report recently called Send the Signal, which is about where we stand nationally on connectivity. You can see that at chiefsforchange.org if you're in the audience. But it paints a picture of a lot of heroic effort in the field, but much work still to be done to make sure that low-income families in particular permanently and sustainably have broadband internet access at home. States have an important role to play in that, as does the federal government. So I think in the new year, there'll be a renewed push to make sure that those connectivity solutions are sustainable. Marie, I know in all of your work in transitioning to virtual learning environments, you've also paid a lot of attention to non-instructional staff and the role that they can play in supporting students even in an online environment. Can you talk a little bit about what comprehensively Miami-Dade's approach has looked like? I think you may be on mute, Marie.
Thank you for having me, and I'm flattered to be with the group of colleagues that are here today. Certainly, we've done a lot of the work that my colleagues are sharing in terms of the teacher development and preparing teachers, and a lot of that work centered around our instructional continuity plan, which has had a lot of play and is available at icp.dadeschools.net. But I think what we're most proud of, or equally proud of, is how in parallel, in tandem to preparing teachers and doing what Barbara explained as this yeoman effort to pivot within a weekend to teachers, that even if you had the resources, and we had digital convergence through our GOB, similar to Barbara's one-to-one efforts in Orange County, there are a number of other people and humans that support the work of teachers, right? And so in terms of teachers being comfortable and lowering their level of anxiety in terms of how the buildings are being prepared, how the buildings are being cleaned, their working conditions, right? So that they're ready and willing and able to return to school, for us was vitally important. Developing and preparing a core of substitute teachers. We know that we were going to have huge, and we're still struggling with that, teacher absences and teachers being quarantined, and teachers with ADA and FMLA, et cetera. And the kids are still going to be there. So how do we prepare the support staff, the behind the scenes folks that are supporting those teachers every day and making sure? So a lot of onboarding on how to use platforms, how social emotional learning, just psychology, pedagogy with our substitute ranks was really important to us as well. Clerical personnel at the school, even having them understand, the anxiety and everything that they're facing equally, but so are the customers that are coming to the school to pick up mobile devices. For us, one of the major focus was around students. We have a very large group of students that are disabled in Miami-Dade County Public Schools. 12% of our students are disabled. And so how do we prepare psychologists, staffing specialists, all of the folks that do the servicing of students, so that when those students are in school, whether they're schoolhouse face-to-face or virtually, that they're also receiving all of those therapies and related services that, number one, they're entitled to by law, and number two, that they need in order to be successful in the classroom. So I'm really proud of the work that we were able to do with those folks that a lot of people aren't talking about, just even like the logistics around having distance or Zoom assisted eligibility EP meetings for students that are in the pipe for advanced academics, for gifted programming. We've done 1,700, almost 1,800 of those meetings virtually. We've had 2,500 initial eligibility and staffing meetings for students that are with students with disabilities, IEP meetings to make sure that those services are being provided, and all the therapies. Psychologists are providing therapies, occupational therapists are providing therapies, and our paraprofessionals that are supporting. And then I think one of the areas that I'm particularly proud of is, I think we can all agree that when we went online, and sometimes you have parents that are actually now exhausted because they feel like they are a pseudo teacher as well. How do we help our parents in making sure that they have, number one, that there's an awareness that we're all in this together, like you're not sending your kid off to the schoolhouse just yet, and that we are going to rely on you, particularly if your child is in pre-K or kindergarten, just even navigating the equipment and the platforms that they have. So how do we support parents, and how do we do that with parents that don't speak English, parents in unstable housing, migrant camp children? So being very intentional about providing them with support. So one of the things that we did is we leveraged a team of 2, and I think now it's a team of 3 that man the Parent Academy. A lot of different districts call it like the Parent University, et cetera, and developing modules, online modules in 3 languages for the parents, anytime, anywhere, on-demand webinars, ranging from mindfulness to online safety, cybersecurity, how to get services for your child, social emotional well-being, and also the technical piece, how to navigate those platforms, et cetera. And I think that has been key to making sure that our parents are also supporting our teachers by supporting their children.
Thank you, Marie. As you mentioned, there's been real concerns about how we support our most vulnerable children and families during this time. Part of the effort to keep at least some of our school buildings open for in-person learning has been important to making sure that our most vulnerable students are served well. Often they require in-person services that are hard to replicate in a virtual environment. Donald, I'd be curious to hear how you and Palm Beach have approached serving and supporting your most vulnerable students. You mentioned that you and your team have had a window into families and students' homes that you haven't had before. What have those conversations been like? What sorts of supports have you developed over this period to support your most vulnerable students?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of intense conversations and really, gut checks on, how, a lot of our population lives. Palm Beach is very interesting because I think we have some of the wealthiest individuals in America, but we also have abject poverty out in our sugarcane fields and all of those realities in the sort of rural parts of the county. And so, first of all, it's just, food insecurity. I mean, good gracious, the amount of lines that we're now seeing pop up again across the country, at the beginning of this pandemic, our food service workers are heroes to me. We've had them out there handing out food since March, and I think in our case, just over the summer alone, we handed out over 5 million meals. I think, the other realities was, Barbara touched on it, well, everybody touched on it. The digital divide, oh man, it became glaring. Yes, we had, the money to buy over 100,000 machines and we handed them out. And, it's interesting, you got food distribution lines and computer lines at the same time. And we're teaching people, we're giving them, the extension cords, all of these things. But what really came to pass is that we had certain communities where they didn't even have broadband wired to their buildings, to where the kids actually lived. So the good news for us was that we were able to quickly galvanize with our, as Barbara said, our philanthropic partners, our business community, BDB, Economic Council, and the county, putting our resources together. And what we're doing in Palm Beach County now is building an infrastructure. So yeah, we even realized we could give kids hotspots, but if they don't have anything to connect to it, then that's a problem. So now we have Florida Power and Light and Comcast, and I can go on and on, our Ed Foundation, really creating this web so that we're putting up like poles, like, we literally have Florida Power and Light putting up poles around certain neighborhoods that we've been able to identify where broadband is an issue, so that we can expand that so it's not an issue. And then the truth was, it wasn't just about the kids, the families as well. In other communities where you had people working from home, but if you have 4 kids, that's a problem as well. And so really being responsive, a lot of surveying, and a lot of really hard questions. I think also the other thing we realized too, we had to find the people that the community would actually listen to. So, we're literally reaching out to pastors or the Jewish community, whomever, whatever communities that actually listening to our families, again, especially some of our families in crisis and need, again, those of us who have migrant families, maybe undocumented families, some people just went into hiding. And so now we're in this very intense effort to find our children. And in some cases, I have principals that are saying, listen, I know, the COVID is real. We have every protocol in the world in place in the schools. But ladies and gentlemen, we need your children back in school. We need to figure out a way for you to get some of this, face-to-face instruction, because that gap is just wide. And I am terribly concerned. Again, I'm a superintendent with children in the schools. And so, but I clearly recognize the privilege I have in my ability to help my children. And a lot of other families don't have that. So really, as Marie said, this sort of parent university, just whatever we can do, Mike and the rest of the team. But again, a lot of it is distribution and just getting all of our resources together. I want to thank Chiefs of Change for being thought partners, and the Council of Great City Schools for being thought partners. But we're not going to fix this today. This is going to be a long-term issue. As I told my team as we start building out our COVID recovery plan, I said, the plan is going to be about 5 or 6 years, y'all. This isn't going to be something we're going to fix over the summer. The gap is just too large. So I think that's why I would leave the conversation, but just a lot of intense and real hard conversations around the realities of our families and students.
I think it's such an important point, Donald, that we're really looking at a multi-year effort to support students in recovery, to accelerate their learning, and to take care of the kind of infrastructure needs in our communities that truthfully we should have taken care of years ago. So we'll certainly be engaged in that as national advocates, and really grateful for all of you on the ground working locally to solve these problems. Barbara, Donald mentioned some of the partnerships in Palm Beach County that have been so important to his ability to support students during this time. I know when it comes to your graduating seniors that you've had important higher education partnerships. Could you talk about what that's looked like? I think sometimes our graduating seniors have been a forgotten population in the midst of all this, but they need as much support as anyone during this time, graduating into a world where higher education can be more difficult to access and unemployment is very high. What has supporting your graduates looked like during this time?
You know, we tell our young people they are going to be a phenomenal generation because they have overcome COVID-19. They are the first group of graduates that did not have an official graduation ceremony. They were heartbroken over that. They didn't have prom. They didn't have so many things, but they showed a level of maturity and acceptance of what could not be changed, and worked really hard around pursuing their goals anyway. And so we push, even during COVID, to have our scholars and those who normally would be trying to get into some of our higher institutions of learning, those that are on those lists that we commonly refer to, we push those students, counselors and teachers and individuals, push those individuals, those students, to make sure they were still pursuing with rigor and effort those institutions of higher learning that they could become a part of. I think because we did remote sessions, we did remote celebrations, we did everything in our power to make them feel like they were moving into the next realm with success on the horizon, that our students responded. It's not just for those that were going to college. We said every student, every graduate needs to have a plan. Shouldn't be leaving OCPS without a plan of what your future is going to look like. So we have our own Orange Technical College. We have industry certifications. We have lots of methods that help our children get on that pathway before they leave high school. We make sure that they have some certification in their high school years to make certain that they have possibilities. Because what we want our children to see is that even in the midst of COVID-19, that they have vast possibilities, multiple pathways, if you will, to success. Our local institutions have absolutely been tremendous partners. University of Central Florida, Valencia State College, Seminole State College, all of our opportunities for students to be dually enrolled. We pushed very strongly, didn't want to see that change because of what we were going through. And we saw quite a bit of success for our students. I will tell you, probably a greater concern was the emotional turmoil that this entire issue placed on our young people. And so we doubled down on social emotional learning, on offering counseling, on saying to teachers as they were online with those students, everybody okay? This is a check-in. You ever want to leave me a message, put it in the chat, in a private chat, because we want to make sure that you're being successful. And so that side, I think, was just as important as the academic rigor. We had to have opportunities for SATs and other methods of getting them into college. And we even did a virtual college fair, if you can imagine, where there was a drive-through, and some of our most needy community members actually had to go through a drive-through. They could watch on a big screen some of the presentations. They could drive by and actually get handouts and pamphlets and information on some of our local colleges and universities. All of that done virtually in one of our poorest communities, because you can pretty much depend on parents with higher socioeconomic backgrounds. They're going to make sure their children still have those opportunities. For children who don't have those kinds of resources available to them, we had to bring them to them, and in some creative ways as well, with some community partnerships. Our Boys and Girls Club helped put on a big college fair that was virtual and drive-through because we wanted our children to remain safe. And our local actual city of Apopka and others helped us celebrate our children in safe ways, because we wanted them to feel they were being launched into the next realm, into their next phase of their lives, which includes learning and growing and gathering career skills so that they can have a successful future. And so we never took down, our board was very clear, the whole notion of student success could not be compromised purely because we had a pandemic raging. We needed to launch this community and that particular graduating class with as much pomp and circumstance as possible. So virtual graduations, big celebrations, all in the midst of COVID, and a continual message that said your life and your success do not have to shut down because of this pandemic. Instead, we're going to find creative ways to keep nurturing you and pushing you forward and pursuing your goals and your dreams. And thanks to so many community partnerships, we have a philanthropic community here that supports our children. They wrap their arms around our young people. They were sent off and they were given resources and scholarships and funding to help them launch their college and higher learning careers.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, we have just a little bit of time left, and I do want to leave time for questions from our audience. So just as a reminder to the audience, you can add questions to the Q&A chat box, and we'll do our best to get to them. The first one we have, Eric, is for you, a question about what, again, this has looked like from the state's perspective, and what lessons do you think have been learned from across the state about how things went in the spring and what the beginning of school has looked like in the fall? I think you might be on mute again, Eric.
You would think as many Zoom meetings as we have now, I'd have that down.
I do it all the time.
You know, it's kind of amazing to think about how far we've come even back in March. I mean, to, again, this pivot to the distance learning. You know, we moved back in the summer to do our first emergency order. It's what we refer to commonly here in the state as Emergency Order 6, that kind of set the stage for how we were going to reopen schools in the fall with parental choices and options. And, you know, I have to say, again, the superintendents have just made significant pivots with the district leaders to, you know, and here we are today. You know, we have about 1.8 million students in our state sitting in brick and mortar schools because of a choice that they're making, you know, with their parents, you know, to meet their needs. I mean, that's a testament to the superintendents and, again, the work that they and the teachers are doing at the school level. And I think what we've seen over the first half of this school year is that when you create choice, parents will take advantage of that choice. And, you know, while Florida's had a long history of creating choice options and opportunities for our families, being able to do things now where a parent can choose brick and mortar, choose an innovative option where, you know, it may be a combination of live instruction, doing things like we're doing today, being able to make those pivots when someone's circumstance may change to have to move to a distance learning model, and then back, you know, over periods of time, schools that are having to make those constant adjustments based on a COVID related impact at a school level, whether that's a student level, a classroom level, or potentially even a building level. I mean, we've seen agility that, of course, we've never seen like in our history. And I think the lessons learned are more testament to what the school leaders and district leaders have been doing, is they're adjusting and they're using agility that, you know, creates challenges. It doubles the work and then some. Teachers having to figure out how to teach to half their class in front of them in a brick and mortar classroom to half joining via Zoom, and how do they allocate their time? And I think the lessons that we've learned here this first half of the year, it goes back to the fact that, you know, we've had to create that agility and that flexibility so that people can make the adjustments that are important to them. And I think, you know, just even yesterday, we had our State Board of Education meeting, and we are working with the superintendents. I mean, I have to say they've been unbelievable partners in helping us think through what are the lessons learned that they've seen on the ground that we need to think about, so that when we get ready to come out with our next emergency order for this next semester, next half of the year, what are the things that we need to have in there so that it empowers them to make the decisions they need to, while still creating a degree of financial support, flexibility, and trying to keep our districts, you know, financially solid going into the second half of this year, because we've made so many tremendous strides. You know, even in the economic downturn and the challenges that we've seen, you know, Florida did step forward and put $500 million into raising minimum teacher pay. We put $100 million this year, an additional $25 million in our funding formula to support expanding more mental health resources in our schools. You know, I think in the end, we've tried to make sure that we're making strategic investments. And again, the lessons learned this first half of the year are really coming from the lessons from the field, you know, those that are closest to the work and closest to the barriers. And we're taking that feedback. And I would say here, we've made a commitment as a department between now and the end of this month to come out with the next order that will provide the support, the resources, the flexibility that we know our parents, our families, and our educators and district leaders need to get us through the second half of this school year.
Thanks, Eric. Related to some of what you were just saying, we've got a question from the audience about whether whether you've seen innovations emerge during this time that you actually think should be a sustainable part of the way we educate children going forward. And Phil, I'd invite you to also weigh in on this if you have thoughts, but have any of you had innovations emerge in your systems that you're excited about and that you want to build sustainably into your programs going forward?
We have a few ideas in Orange, and I will tell you, there is I think nobody should be waiting for us to get back to the way things were, because I think there is no going back to the way things were. And I think our parents would demand that some things remain, and I think our children deserve that we take advantage of some of the changes. So I think parents are going to continue to insist on choice, that they have the ability to determine where their child will receive their instruction, brick and mortar or at home. Frightening thing, if I might add, is that where we suspected we would have more of our children from challenging socioeconomic backgrounds being more in school than at home is not always the case. And the conundrum we find is that those are also the families who may be underserved with their health issues and may have very good reason to be fearful about coming back. If their home is multi-generational, grandma's at home, then the mother is afraid to send the child to school because it exposes the grandchild, so the grandmother. And so I understand everyone won't see the same solutions to the problems, but I think we can do things like apprenticeships. I think we can help our young people take their classes in the evenings or take their classes, their actual academic classes during certain days, and then also be able to do apprenticeships and internships and working if they need to help support their family. I think the secondary level especially has some significant opportunities around changing the way we schedule and the way that we educate our children. It doesn't have to be 6 periods a day, every day. I think we have some opportunities to be very flexible and creative around particularly the high school. And then I think choice is just absolutely going to be demanded from our parents.
Thank you, Barbara. I couldn't agree more. I mean, many of us have said that the pandemic has shined a very bright light on inequities in our communities. But one of the things I hear across Chiefs for Change membership is that housing should not determine the quality of the public services that you're able to receive, whether those be education and learning, healthcare, other services that everyone has a right to. And if the virtual learning opportunities and platforms that we're building during this time can help us to ensure equitable access to high quality learning going forward, I think in fact that will be a silver lining to this, very, very difficult crisis.
Mike, I would add to what Barbara said. When we in March and April and May were talking about designing the distance learning platform for the future. So I'll be honest, I really thought we would be in regular school in August. So what I told the team was, I need to build this distance learning like in the HOV lane. And at that time, my goal was, okay, if Donald and Eric get into a fight, they're typically suspended for 10 days. Go gets the work, Eric parent doesn't. And so there's this gap. Well, with distance learning, both of you go home and log in. It became this idea, our alt schools, often, unfortunately, and we need our best teachers in some of our alternative education sites and some of our most hard to staff schools. So now we can actually put some of our best teachers with our kids in most need through this distance learning platform. So these are all things that have kind of, the forced innovation really kind of makes us think differently about our human capital. I mean, financially, in our career and choice programs, we don't have the tech schools like Orange County does and other counties, but it's hard to find great teachers. So, when boards or people say we want this in every community, well, it might be easier if we find 1 or 2 great ones and get kids access to great educators. So in addition to what Barbara said, I think the high school kids have made the choice for us. They're just making what I consider adult decisions. It's get up at 6 o'clock, get up at 7:15 and log in at 7:30. And, you know, and we see more kids, unfortunately, I think because of the economic downturn, a lot of kids are going to work. A lot of kids are working. And so having the flexibility in their schedules, I think we've seen a slight uptick in encouraging kids to take more advanced coursework because there's a plethora of resources that now support it. And let's be clear, on the equity side, a lot of kids were denied access to high-end courses because, you know, teachers said they didn't have the teacher-pleasing behaviors. So there's a lot of things, I think, you know, Barbara spoke to it clearly, but I think there's a lot of these innovations. I think the thing, now let me speak from a parent's perspective. With my son, he said, Daddy, I took a science test today. And I said, as a superintendent, when are you going to get your score back? Feedback is instant.
There you go.
Yeah, feedback is instant now.
That's great. That's great. Well, I could certainly talk all day to all of you about the work. It's so important. We're really grateful for everything you're doing to serve your communities and to be national leaders as well. Again, want to thank Impact Florida and the Lastinger Center for their partnership on this. I know it's just the beginning of the work in Florida. And Trey, I'll turn it back to you to wrap us up.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And thanks to all of you. Just a really amazing panel of perspectives about this issue that unfortunately, I think, Dr. Fennoy, we're all hoping to be back to normal in August. And I think now we're all hoping to be back to normal by next August. And obviously, there's a lot of folks working in a lot of different ways, both outside the education system, but also, you know, really hats off to all of you for your creativity and your hard work and your flexibility on both as leaders and all throughout your systems, and particularly your classroom teachers. We appreciate this discussion today. Phil, thank you for the research you and your team have done. We'd encourage everybody to download the report from the Lastinger Center, take a look at it, and chew on it a little bit. There's some really great learnings in there. Also would encourage everyone to follow Impact Florida, the Lastinger Center, and Chiefs for Change online, because we do have some additional materials that will be coming out over the coming weeks, including videos and some additional information that the Lastinger team has pulled together during their research. So thank you all, and stay safe out there.